In the beginning, before the first city rose from stone, before the first crown was forged from war, there were wolves. Not the small, frightened creatures humans imagine when they hear the word. No. These were something far older, far more terrible, far more beautiful. They were the Lycan, the children of the moon, born of silver light and shadow, shaped by a goddess whose name mortal tongues could not speak without trembling. They built empires in the deep forests. They carved law from bone and blood. They did not merely howl at the moon, they answered to it. For 10,000 years, the werewolf world operated beneath a system as old as the stars themselves. Packs rose and fell like tides. Alphas ruled with absolute authority, strength above all else. And at the top of this ancient hierarchy sat one throne, one title, one being of incomprehensible power, the Alpha King. The position was not inherited, it was claimed, forged through battle, through dominance, through the silent approval of the moon goddess herself. And for the past 3 centuries, that throne had been held by one bloodline, the House of Dardanos. Like as Dardanos, the current Alpha King had never lost a fight, had never been challenged and survived, had never shown a moment of weakness in the 32 years of his brutal, brilliant reign. He was not known for mercy. He was not known for warmth. He was known for exactly 3 things: power, precision, and the absolute refusal to be controlled by anyone, including fate itself. The wind shifts. Something darker moves through it. Which is why, when the moon goddess chose his mate, the one soul in all the world designed to be his perfect counterpart, his eternal anchor, Lycan Dardanos looked at that bond like a chain around his wrists, and he decided to break it. What he did not count on was this. The mate the moon chose for him was not a woman who could be broken. She had already survived things that should have destroyed her, and somewhere in the marrow of her silver bones, she carried a power that would eventually make even the Alpha King kneel. Before we begin, if you love dark Lycan Kings, forbidden mates, and stories that make your heart ache, comment where you are watching from and subscribe for epic Lycan King romances where omegas rise, kings fall, and love is never gentle. The rejection. Torchlight crackling. Hundreds of wolves breathing in the dark. A ceremonial drum beats 3 times, then silence. The ceremonial hall of Black Moon Pack had stood for 600 years. Its walls were black stone, quarried from the mountain that gave the territory its name. Its torches burned perpetually, fed by some ancient enchantment that the pack's oldest wolves refused to explain. Its floor was a mosaic of midnight marble inlaid with silver, depicting the great moon goddess in all her terrible glory, arms outstretched above a writhing world. Nyx had never been inside it before. She stood at its center now, and she felt like an insect placed beneath a magnifying glass. Hundreds of wolves packed the tiered stone galleries above her, their eyes reflecting the torchlight in shades of amber, green, and burning gold. She could feel their collective attention like physical pressure against her skin. She kept her chin up. She had learned long ago that wolves could smell fear, and tonight she could not afford to smell like prey. The doors at the far end of the hall swung open without being touched. Heavy doors, groaning on ancient hinges. The crowd falls utterly silent. He entered like weather. That was the only way Nyx could describe it afterward, when she had the luxury of words, of distance, of anything other than the overwhelming reality of him filling the room. Lycus Dardanos moved like a storm that had decided to take the shape of a man. He was enormous, not merely tall, though he was that nearly a head above every wolf in the room, but enormous in the way that mountains are enormous, and the kind of large that makes the air around it feel smaller. Dark hair, slightly disheveled, as if he'd dragged his hands through it on the walk here, a jaw carved from the same black stone as the walls, a long coat the color of dried blood, and eyes like molten gold. Those eyes found her immediately, and they were not warm. The bond hit her the moment he crossed the threshold. It was nothing like what the elders described: gentle recognition, warmth blooming through the chest, the quiet sense of coming home. No. For Nyx, the bond arriving felt like being struck by lightning, like someone had reached into her chest, wrapped a fist around her soul, and pulled. Her wolf surged inside her, wild, desperate, joyful in a way Nyx had never felt before and would never quite feel again. "Mate," her wolf whispered. "He is our mate." And then he opened his mouth, and her world shattered. "What is your name?" The voice alone, deep, cold, utterly without inflection, made every wolf in the gallery lean fractionally back, not from fear, from instinct, from the ancient part of their animal selves that recognized absolute authority and responded accordingly. Nyx's throat had gone completely dry. "Nyx," she whispered. "Nyx Evander." He studied her. Those gold eyes moved over her slowly, not with desire, not with curiosity, with the particular cool assessment of a commander evaluating a potential liability. "Good," he said, and then, without any change in his expression, without any hesitation, "I am going to reject you." The words hit her like a blade entering flesh. Not the sharp first shock, but the slow, spreading burn afterward. Pain detonated through her chest. Nay, through her ribs, through her spine, through every nerve ending in her body simultaneously. The bond, so newly formed, so desperately fragile, screamed as the first crack appeared in it. She gasped. Her hands flew to her chest. She could feel her wolf howling internally, throwing herself against the walls of Nyx's consciousness in anguish. The wolves in the gallery watched in silence, some with pity, most without it. "And you are going to accept my rejection," Lycus continued, his voice the same temperature as the stone floor beneath her feet. "And forget about me." The room spun. Nyx pressed her teeth together, fighting the tears that burned at the corners of her eyes. She would not give them this. She would not collapse on the floor of his hall, in front of his wolves, so weeping for a man who looked at her like she was an inconvenience to be resolved. Why?" she managed. Her voice came out smaller than she intended, younger. Something flickered in his expression, something too fast and too carefully controlled for her to name. "I am the Alpha King," he said. "I do not need a mate like you." A murmur moved through the watching wolves. Someone in the upper gallery laughed, a short, ugly sound that died when the wolf next to them grabbed their arm. Nyx felt the tears spill over before she could stop them. She hated herself for it immediately. "Stop crying," Lycus said sharply. She flinched, not from the words, from the contempt underneath them. The absolute certainty that her pain was something beneath his notice. He straightened, rolled his shoulders back, and prepared to speak the formal words that would sever what the moon had woven. "I, Lycus Dardanos, Alpha King of the Werewolf community, reject—" A crack, like the world splitting. Then absolute silence. Then a roar of white light. The light came from everywhere at once, from the torches, from the silver inlay in the floor, from Nyx herself, blazing from her skin like the surface of the moon brought down to earth. A shockwave of pure, ancient power detonated outward from her body. Wolves dove from the galleries, stone cracked. The heavy iron chandeliers swung wildly. Somewhere above, a section of the ceiling fractured and rained down dust. Lycus was thrown backward 3 full steps. Lycus Dardanos, the Alpha King, a man who had never been moved by anything. 3 steps. And then everything went dark. The cursed wolf. Silence. Then hushed, frightened voices. The sound of wolves shifting uneasily in a confined space. Nyx awoke to pain and whispers. She lay on the cold mosaic floor, cheek pressed against the silver image of the moon goddess, the irony of which was not lost on her even through the fog of agony. Every muscle in her body had been wrung dry. Her skull pounded, the bond in her chest, that terrible, unwanted thing, pulsed weakly, like a candle in a hurricane. Still there. It should have been severed. He had begun the rejection. The words should have cut the tether between them like an axe through rope, left her hollow and permanently scarred, the way rejected mates always were. But the bond remained. She pushed herself upright on shaking arms and found the hall still crowded, but different now. How the wolves had pressed back toward the walls, leaving a wide circle of empty space around her. As if she were contagious, as if the ground she touched might be cursed. Some of them looked terrified. She heard the whispers moving through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. The moon interrupted the rejection. That power, did you see it? She's cursed. No, worse than cursed. She's marked. Lycus stood across the hall. He had not moved toward her. He had not knelt to check if she breathed. He watched her sit up with those molten gold eyes, and his expression was the most dangerous thing in the room. Not fury, not fear. Calculation. "What are you?" he asked. Nyx held his gaze. Her jaw ached from clenching it. She could feel every eye in the room focused on this exchange. I could feel the weight of history pressing down on the moment. "Your mate," she said. Something shifted in his expression, deep, almost imperceptible, gone before she could name it. "No," he said very quietly. "You are something worse." He turned and walked out of the hall without another word, and Nyx sat alone in the center of the room, surrounded by frightened wolves, the bond burning in her chest like an ember that refused to die. Her silver wolf paced inside her skull. "We are not cursed," the wolf murmured. "We are chosen." Nyx didn't believe her, not yet. Sold into slavery. Flashback ambiance, rain on a tin roof, the sound of cards on a table, men's laughter, the clink of coins. To understand Nyx Evander, you must understand where she began. Not the ceremonial hall, not the forest. Long before Lycus Dardanos ever laid eyes on her, in a dim, smoke-filled room in a border territory nobody claimed, her life was decided in a card game. Her father had loved 3 things: cheap whiskey, deep gambling, and the delusion that his luck would eventually turn. It never did. She was 16 when he lost his final hand. The stake he offered, when he had run out of everything else, was his eldest daughter, Nyx, the girl with the strange pale eyes and the wolf that had not yet awakened. The man who won her was called Alpha Vero Caney. He was not kind. He brought her to his pack territory in the southern marshlands, a brutal and isolated place where the sun rarely broke through the permanent cloud cover, where the trees grew sideways from the weight of the wind. He put her to work immediately, cleaning, cooking. running messages, doing everything the wolves of his pack considered too degrading for a wolf of recognized standing. She was not a recognized wolf. She was a debt repaid. She was property. For 2 years she endured it. She endured the calluses from the labor, the bruises from the wolves who thought their authority extended to their fists, the cold from the unheated room she shared with other servants, the humiliation of being called by no name, simply she or the girl or come here. She endured, because she had no other choice. And then, 3 months after her 18th birthday, on a night when the moon hung low and full and heavy as a lantern in the sky, her wolf awakened. A sound like a bell struck once, clean and clear. Then wind, howling up from nowhere. The awakening was supposed to be transformative, a coming of age, a revelation, a joyful recognition of one's true nature. For most wolves, it was exactly that. The first shift was painful, but ecstatic, an emergence from oneself into something larger and more complete. For Nyx, it lasted 3 days. 3 days of fever, of her bones breaking and remaking themselves, of screaming she couldn't stop, of the pack watching from a fearful distance as something unprecedented happened in the servants' quarters. When she finally rose, when her wolf finally settled into its true form, the room fell utterly silent, because her wolf was silver, not gray, not white. Silver, the exact color of the moon itself, a luminous metallic sheen that caught the light and scattered it. Her wolf's eyes were the palest blue, almost white, like winter ice over deep water. And when she breathed, that the air around her shimmered faintly. Alpha-Caney stared at her for a long time. Then he took a step back, and Nyx understood, from the look on his face, that her life had just become infinitely more complicated. Silver wolves were legend. In 10,000 years of werewolf history, they appeared perhaps once in a generation, if that. The ancient texts described them as harbingers, as vessels, as the rare individuals through whom the moon goddess chose to work directly in the mortal world. The packs feared what they could not control, and they could not control Nyx, so they called her cursed instead. Better to make her the monster. It made the fear easier to carry. The abomination, a storm. Thunder so close it shakes the walls. Rain, hammering stone. A woman in agony. 6 months after her wolf awakened, that Nyx discovered she was pregnant. She told no one. She hid it for as long as she could, which, in a pack full of wolves with heightened senses, was not nearly long enough. Alpha-Caney knew within weeks. He said nothing. He watched her with those cold, calculating eyes and said nothing at all, which was somehow worse than any punishment. The pregnancy was brutal. Silver wolves were not supposed to be able to carry children easily. Something in the unusual nature of their power made it metabolically grueling, draining in ways that ordinary wolves couldn't understand. Nyx worked through the exhaustion, through the pain, through the swollen months of summer heat and autumn chill, carrying laundry and firewood and messages, and her own private, desperate hope. She didn't know who the father was. That was the shameful truth she carried alongside everything else. One of Alpha-Cain's wolves, in a night she had not entirely consented to, in a territory where her consent did not technically matter. She told herself the child was hers. Only hers. The father was irrelevant. The child was what mattered. The birth came during the worst storm the territory had seen in a decade. Thunder shaking the world, lightning splitting the sky, the crack of a tree falling somewhere close. Nyx labored alone in her small, cold room, biting down on a strip of leather to muffle her screams. No midwife came. No pack healer appeared with herbs and steadying hands. She was alone with the storm and the pain and the flickering, inadequate lantern light. Hours passed, and then, in the precise moment when the lightning struck nearest, and when the thunder was so loud it seemed to come from inside the walls, a child entered the world. Silence, then a cry, thin and fierce and absolutely certain of itself. Nyx pulled the infant to her chest with shaking hands. The lantern light steadied. Outside, the rain continued, and the baby opened her eyes. Silver, not the silver of her wolf, the silver of the stars themselves. Word spread through the pack before morning. Wolves filled the doorway of her room, staring at the child in Nyx's arms, with expressions that ranged from horror to fury to barely concealed panic. She heard the words they used. Abomination. Demon child. Kill it before it brings ruin on us all. Alpha Caney pushed through the crowd to the doorway. He looked at the baby for a long, terrible moment, and nodded. Just that. One small motion of his head, and Nyx understood. She was already moving before the first wolf stepped through the door. Running footsteps, a window shattering, the storm howling to receive them. She wrapped the child in her own shirt. She ran out the window and into the rain, into the howling dark, into the forest that most wolves avoided because nothing good lived in its depths. She ran barefoot through the mud and the blood and the cold. She ran until the sounds of pursuit faded. She ran until there was only the storm and the trees, and the child pressed against her chest, making small, fierce sounds against her shoulder. She named her Luna, for the moon that had apparently decided they were worth something, even if no one else agreed. Years of survival. The deep forest at night. Owls. A fire burning low. Small sounds of a child sleeping. At that, the years that followed were not gentle. Nyx had grown up in a pack. She knew, theoretically, how to survive in the wild, how to hunt, which plants were edible, how to read weather patterns, how to find water. But knowing something theoretically and doing it alone, with a newborn child, in territories where every pack considered you a threat, these were very different things. The first winter nearly killed them both. She built shelter from deadfall and pine boughs. She hunted in her wolf form while Luna slept. Quick, ranging hunts that kept one ear always cocked toward the sound of her daughter's breathing. She made mistakes. She ate things that made her sick. She got turned around in snowstorms and spent terrifying hours finding her way back to wherever she had left the child. But she learned, season by season, failure by failure, she learned. By the time Luna was 2, Nyx could track prey across frozen ground, could start a fire in a downpour, could sense approaching wolves from half a mile away and have them moving in minutes. By the time Luna was 4, the little girl could shift on her own. A small, delighted laugh. The sound of a tiny wolf bounding through leaves. The first time Luna shifted, Nyx sat in the clearing and cried for the first time in years, not from grief, but from the overwhelming, unbearable beauty of it. The child's wolf was the same silver as her own, but brighter, more intense. When Luna ran through the forest in her wolf form, the trees around her seemed to glow faintly, as if her body shed moonlight. The rogues came for them 3 times in those years. The first time, Nyx ran. She was faster than they expected. The second time, she stood her ground. She was stronger than they expected. The third time, she was waiting for them. She won that fight badly enough that no rogues came again for 18 months. Packs rejected them at every border. Humans feared them. The strange woman who moved like shadow, and the child with the two bright eyes who didn't quite behave like an ordinary girl. There were nights when Nyx sat beside their small fire and looked at Luna sleeping, and felt the weight of the world bearing down on her so heavily that breathing seemed like an act of will. But she did breathe. She always breathed. Because Luna existed. Because somewhere in the silver-eyed girl who collected interesting stones and asked impossible questions, and laughed like bells in a wind, somewhere in that child was everything Nyx had almost not survived to create. A purpose is a strange and sustaining thing. It keeps you breathing even on the nights when nothing else can. The Alpha King returns. Dawn. Birds beginning. The sound of a forest border. The subtle shift in the air at the edge of claimed territory. She crossed the border at dawn, chasing an elk. That was all it was, in the beginning. The elk had led her further than she'd intended. A chase that started in neutral territory and ended somewhere she didn't recognize. She was deep in her hunt. Mind narrowed to the rhythm of pursuit and the distance between herself and the prey, when the scent hit her. Pack, strong pack. Not a border patrol, not a scout. A full, established, densely populated territory. Saturated with the scent of hundreds of wolves who had lived here for generations. She pulled up short, let the elk go, and stood in the gray morning light and tried to identify the pack by scent. And then she smelled something else, something that stopped her breathing entirely. Him, older, layered with years and authority, and something darker, something that had not been in the bond when it formed, but unmistakably, undeniably, his scent. The Alpha King's scent, woven through the fabric of this territory like thread through cloth. She had wandered into Black Moon Pack. She turned to run. Too late. Movement in the trees. Multiple bodies, fast and silent. Wolves converging. They came from 3 directions simultaneously. 6 wolves, shifting mid-run from their human to their animal forms, surrounding her in a coordinated sweep that spoke of long practice. She shifted immediately, and putting herself between them and the direction of the camp where Luna waited, and faced them with her silver fur raised along her spine. They stopped. She saw the moment they recognized what she was, saw the sudden uncertainty that replaced their predatory confidence. Silver Wolf. The stories they'd heard, the legends, the warnings, none of them moved, none of them attacked. But they didn't let her go either. A 7th wolf emerged from the tree line, this one in human form, tall, dark-haired, wearing the expression of a man who had not expected his morning to include this particular problem. His second in command, his beta. Behind him, at a distance that nonetheless felt immediate, because everything about him felt immediate, came Lycus Dardanos. He smelled her before he saw her clearly. She saw the precise moment it happened, the way his stride hitched barely perceptibly, the way his shoulders locked, the way the gold of his eyes intensified from cold to something that wasn't entirely cold. He pushed past his beta. He walked to the edge of the wolf circle his guards had formed. He looked at her in her silver wolf form, at the impossible shimmer of her, at the ancient power that was visible in her very stance, and his jaw tightened. She held his gaze. She had gotten rather good at that over the years. He was about to speak. She could see it in the gathering of his breath, when a sound came from behind her. Small footsteps, crashing through underbrush with the particular heedless confidence of a child who does not yet understand the concept of danger. And a small voice, high and clear and utterly uncowed. "Mama, I woke up and you weren't there. I heard wolves." Luna emerged from the trees, 6 years old, silver-eyed, carrying a large stick she had apparently decided would serve as a weapon if needed. Looking at the assembled wolves of Black Moon Pack with a total absence of fear that was simultaneously heartbreaking and magnificent. The silence that followed was complete. Nyx shifted back to her human form, placing herself instantly between Luna and every other wolf in the clearing. She wrapped one arm around her daughter's shoulders without looking away from Lycus. Lycus looked at Luna. Luna looked at Lycus. "Are you a king?" Luna asked. She had assessed him and apparently decided this was the relevant question. Something moved in Lycus's expression. Something that cracked the perfect control, just slightly. Just enough. "I am," he said. You should be nicer," Luna said. "Kings are supposed to protect people." His beta made a strangled sound. Lycus looked at Nyx. Nyx looked back at him and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Everything that mattered was already visible. Luna's silver eyes. The physical impossibility of that much power in a child this young. The bond between Nyx and Lycus, old and scarred but still there, pulsing like a wounded heart. "She is mine," Lycus said quietly. It was not a question. "She is mine," Nyx corrected. The steel in her voice surprised even her. "She has always been mine. You didn't want us, remember?" The gold in his eyes burned hotter, and somewhere deep in Nyx's chest, something she had believed permanently dead made a single, unwanted sound, like a coal catching fire in a long, cold hearth. At the truth between them. Interior. A stone room, fire in a hearth, tension wound so tight it hums. They brought her inside the pack compound, under what Lycus called protection and what Nyx privately called captivity. It was a distinction she decided not to make out loud. Not yet. Luna was fed. Excellent food, which she ate with the single-minded focus of a child who had spent years never quite having enough. She was settled in front of a fire with a stack of books she could not read, but examined with great seriousness nonetheless. A pack wolf was stationed outside the room, which Luna treated as the presence of a personal attendant, requesting things from him with the calm authority of someone born to it. Nyx was brought to Lycus's private study. He was standing at the window when she entered, his back to her, looking out at his territory. In profile, in the afternoon light, he looked older than she remembered. Not old. He was immortal in the way all alpha wolves were, preserved by the power of the bond, but weathered, as if the years had not aged him so much as used him. She didn't feel sorry for him. She reminded herself of this firmly. "How long?" he asked, without turning. "How long what? How long have you been alone in the wild, with a child?" 6 years. He turned then, and for the first time, she saw something on his face that was not cold indifference. It was there and gone in an instant, ruthlessly controlled, but she saw it. Something that looked like shame. "She carries my power," he said. "She carries her own power," Nyx said. Whatever origin it has, it belongs to her." "I will not pretend she is not my heir." "No," Nyx agreed. "But you will not pretend you have any authority over me. You rejected me. Whatever the moon did or didn't do, you made your position clear." Silence. Outside, wind moved through the pines. "Why did you reject me?" she asked. She had promised herself she wouldn't. But it was still in her, that question, like a splinter too deep to reach. What did you know about me that made me so unacceptable? He was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Silver wolves, he said finally, in the old histories are described as instruments of the goddess, not mates, not equals, powers, forces. The old kings feared them because a silver wolf's mate becomes her anchor, bound to her purpose, her mission, her fate. I had been told my whole life that to accept a silver wolf was to surrender my autonomy to something larger than myself. The admission cost him something. She could see it in his jaw, the rigidity of his spine. You rejected me because you were afraid, Nick said. I was wrong, he said. That is not the same thing. No, she agreed quietly. But it's close. War of mates. Drums in the distance, howls on the wind, not the voice of a single wolf, but dozens coordinated, a message in the old language. The message arrived on the third day. It came in the old way. Not words on paper, but a border incursion. A pack of 24 wolves running the boundary of Black Moon territory in tight formation, leaving scent markers and deliberate damage. And it was the werewolf equivalent of a declaration printed in the language of the body and the earth. Alpha Varo Caney. He had tracked her. Of course he had. He had always been patient. It was the most dangerous thing about him, that patience. He had waited 6 years, building his forces, extending his alliances, working his way into the good graces of 3 other packs who feared the silver wolf and its implications. And now he came with a coalition of 4 packs, nearly 800 wolves, and a single demand. Return the silver wolf. Return the abomination child. Or face a war that would end with Black Moon Pack reduced to ash and memory. Nyx sat in Lycus's war council and listened to this delivered by his beta and felt something go very quiet inside her. Not fear. She had outrun fear years ago. Something else. And something cold and still and deep, like the eye of a storm that knows what's coming. He wants us, she said when the beta finished. Not you. Not Black Moon. He doesn't care about pack politics. He cares about Luna and me because he knows what we are. What are you? One of the War Council members asked, not bothering to be subtle about his suspicion. Nyx looked at him, then at the rest of them, the assembled generals of the most powerful pack in the world, men and women who had survived decades of war and politics and power, looking at her with a combination of calculation and doubt. A threat to the old order, she said simply. The ancient packs, Caney's coalition, they built their power on a particular understanding of what silver wolves mean. Instruments of chaos, cursed, dangerous. If Luna and I exist openly, if we're accepted rather than destroyed, their whole framework collapses. Because the truth is... She paused. The room was silent. The truth is that silver wolves aren't cursed. They're chosen. And packs that have survived by telling their people that the moon's chosen are abominations cannot afford to have that lie disproved. The silence that followed was different in quality. Thinking silence. Absorbing silence. Lycus, who had not spoken since the council began, met her eyes across the long table. For the first time, what she saw in his was not calculation. It was recognition, finally, seeing who she truly was. The War Council lasted until dawn. Lycus mobilized Black Moon Pack's full strength, all 3,000 wolves, sent out calls to allied packs across the territory. The response was not unanimous. 3 packs declined, deciding fear of the silver wolf. 2 others committed immediately. More waited to see which way the wind blew. It wasn't enough. They both knew it. Caney's coalition had numbers, preparation, and terrain advantage. They'd been building for this for 6 years. Black Moon Pack had 3 days. Nyx took long walks at night along the pack boundary. Luna asleep inside the compound under the watchful eye of a guard who had developed, over 3 days, a sincere and helpless fondness for the silver-eyed girl, who called him Mr. Wolf. On the second night, Lycus found her at the boundary marker. They stood side by side in the dark, not speaking, and looked out at the territory beyond. "If you left," he said finally, "if you took Luna and ran, they might not pursue you into the deep wilderness." "They would eventually," she said. And then I'd be alone again instead of having an army at my back." "This is not your fight. Every fight for my daughter's right to exist is my fight." Silence. "I should have—" he started. "Don't," she said. "Not tonight. Tonight I need you to be the Alpha King, not the man who made a mistake. I need your strategy, your strength, your pack. We can have whatever conversation you're trying to have after we win." He looked at her for a long moment. "After we win," he repeated, as if she had handed him something he hadn't known he was waiting for. She walked back toward the compound. After a moment, he followed. The Battle of Black Moon. The deep hush before battle, wind dying, a blood moon rising over the forest, staining everything crimson. The attack came at midnight, as expected. 800 wolves pouring across the Black Moon border from 3 directions simultaneously, a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm and scatter before a coherent defense could be mounted. It was a good strategy. It had probably worked well against lesser packs. Lycus had anticipated every line of it. Black Moon Pack met them at the borders, not in a defensive crouch, but in full offensive formation, driving into the flanks of the incursion before it could fully develop. The forest became a riot of sound and motion, howls and snarls, and the percussion of massive bodies colliding, the crack of wood as combatants drove each other through underbrush and over deadfall. Nyx fought on the eastern flank. She had not fought in a coordinated battle before. She had only ever fought alone, the brutal, economical violence of a wolf who could not afford to tire. But she found, to her own surprise, that years of lone survival had made her something more dangerous than a disciplined soldier. She was unpredictable. She didn't fight the way trained pack wolves fought. Didn't use the patterns they'd learned to defend against. She was faster than most expected, more relentless than all of them. Her silver wolf in combat glowed faintly, a cold luminescence that seemed to disorient the wolves she faced, throwing off their timing, making them hesitate at the worst moments. She drove through the eastern flank with her shoulder-mounted warriors and pushed Caney's wolves back 100 yards in the first 20 minutes. Then, the second wave came. A deeper howl. Command wolves rallying scattered forces. Sodernen, it was 3 times the size of the first. Caney had held back the majority of his coalition for the second push, betting that Black Moon would overextend chasing the initial feint. It was a smart bet. The eastern flank buckled. Nyx felt the line breaking. Felt it before she saw it, in the way the wolves beside her shifted weight and angle. She shifted to her full wolf form without breaking stride and drove herself into the center of the collapse, moving against the tide. And the silver wolf emerged. Not just the animal, something beyond it. Something older, deeper, the thing the ancient texts had actually been trying to describe when they called her cursed and couldn't find better language for it. A power that was not attack. Not defense. Not any human or animal concept of fighting. Silence on the battlefield. Everything stopping. Not even the wind. Every wolf on the eastern flank stopped moving. Caney's wolves and Black Moon's wolves alike, all of them frozen, staring at the silver wolf that stood in the center of the collapsed line, glowing so bright she cast shadows in the blood-red moonlight. She was not simply fighting, she was calling. That was the only word for it. The power that poured off her moved through the wolves around her like a tide, reached into the animal part of them, the part that preceded culture and hierarchy and politics and fear, and spoke to it directly, in the language the moon goddess had used before language existed. Stand down. Lay down the arms the fear made you pick up. Remember what you are. 7 of Cain's wolves shifted back to human form, then 12 more, then 30. They sat or stood or sank to their knees, looking dazed, or looking at each other, looking at the silver wolf, and laid down their weapons in confused, dawning recognition of something they could not have named, but could not deny. Caney reached her through the stillness in his largest wolf form, a massive, scarred gray beast that had survived 30 years of conquest. He hit her like a freight train. She held. An impact like 2 forces of nature colliding, then a sound like thunder, without storm. They fought for 7 minutes. It felt longer. Every second of it was Caney's strength against her power, brute weight and experience against something that was not physical, that didn't tire or flinch or respond to pain the way animal bodies were supposed to. He pinned her twice. She threw him off both times. On the 7th minute, she caught him mid-lunge, drove him into the earth, and then pinned him in turn. And the silver light that had been pouring off her gathered and focused and spoke. Not violence, not dominance, recognition, final, irrevocable. Alpha Cain's wolf went still beneath her. Then slowly, for the first time in 30 years of conquest, he lay flat. Submission. Complete and absolute. Across the battlefield, the sound of fighting slowed, stuttered, stopped. Lycus reached her side as Caney shifted back to human form, gasping on the forest floor. The Alpha King said nothing. He simply stood beside her, his shoulder against hers, warm and certain and present, and looked out at the battlefield. Caney's coalition was done. The legend was no longer legend. The Alpha King's realization. After battle, the forest settling, far-off howls, victory calls, morning calls, a fire being built somewhere. They stood together under the moon afterward. The battle was over. The coalition had dispersed, some fleeing, some surrendering, some simply sitting down in the forest and not moving, still processing the silver wolf's call. The Black Moon wolves moved through the aftermath with efficiency, treating injuries, securing prisoners, establishing perimeters. Nick sat on a fallen log at the edge of the forest. Her human form returned, her silver wolf quiet inside her for the first time in hours. She was exhausted in a way she had never been before. Not physically, though that too, but deep in the place where the power came from. Bone-tired in her soul. Lycus sat beside her, not close, but not at a distance either. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "I was wrong," he said finally. And she let the words sit in the air. Let him hear the weight of them. "I know," she said. "The rejection. The moon refusing to complete it." He stopped. Started again. "I thought I was protecting my autonomy. I was actually refusing to acknowledge something I was afraid of." "Afraid of the power," she said. "Or afraid of the vulnerability." He was quiet for a moment. "Both," he admitted. The moon hung above them, full and impossibly bright, the blood red of the battle hours fading back to silver and white. The forest breathed around them. "She never let me fully reject you," he said. "The moon. The bond was always there. I think I knew, in some part of me, that I refused to let speak. I knew something was wrong. Something was wrong for years." "Something was wrong," Nyx agreed. "So we were surviving in the wilderness, and you were sitting on a throne feeling incomplete, and neither of us had what we were supposed to have." He looked at her then, really looked at her, the way he hadn't permitted himself to look at her in the ceremonial hall, hadn't permitted himself since she'd arrived in his territory. Not the Alpha King surveying a situation, not the strategist assessing an asset, just a man, looking at the woman the universe had decided he belonged to. "Luna," he said softly. "She named herself after the moon." "I named her," Nyx said. "She just grew into it. She told my guard that kings should be nicer." Despite everything, despite all of it, something in Nyx's chest loosened into a shape that was almost warmth. "She's right," Nyx said. He stood. And then he did something Nyx had never seen. I had never imagined she would see. Had never imagined she wanted to see until this moment. Lycan Dardanos, Alpha King of the Werewolf world, lord of the most powerful pack in recorded history, bowed his head before her, not the shallow political acknowledgement of a superior to an equal, not the strategic calculation of a king managing an asset, the bow of a person acknowledging a debt they cannot repay any other way, the bow of a man who has understood too late what he threw away, and is asking with everything his pride will allow for the chance to earn it back. "I ask you to accept me," he said, to the woman he had once rejected in front of hundreds. "Not as your king, as your mate, as whatever I need to be to earn a place beside you, and beside her." Nyx looked at the moon. She thought about 6 years. About cold winters and pursued dawns and the weight of being alone in the wilderness, with only her will between her daughter and the dark. She thought about the bond that had never broken, that the moon had refused to let break, that had pulsed weakly in her chest, through all of it like a wound that wouldn't heal because it wasn't supposed to be healed. It was supposed to be completed. She thought about Luna, who had looked at the most powerful wolf in the world and told him he should be nicer. And then she looked at Lycan Dardanos, Alpha King, head bowed before her in the moonlight, and she made a choice. Not forgiveness, not yet. That would take time and patience and honesty, and they would have to earn it together. But a beginning. "Stand up," she said quietly, "and be nicer. We'll start there." The corner of his mouth moved. Just barely. It was, she suspected, the closest he came to smiling. Somewhere in the forest behind them, a single wolf howled, long, clear, triumphant, and the moon answered in the only way it knew how, by shining. The rise of the Silver Queen and the shadow that waited. 7 years later, wind through ancient pines, the sound of a great gathering, thousands of wolves, breathing as one. The ceremony took place on the night of the winter solstice, under a sky so clear the stars looked close enough to hold. It was the largest gathering in werewolf history. Wolves had come from every territory, from the frozen north where the packs ran beneath the aurora, from the southern coasts where they hunted in ocean shadow, from the deep mountain territories that sent emissaries only once in a generation. They stood in their thousands across the hills surrounding Black Moon Pack's ceremonial ground, and they watched the moon in silence, waiting. Inside the ceremonial hall, rebuilt from the original black stone, expanded to hold 5 times the number it once had, the ceiling opened to the sky at its center. 2 figures stood at its heart: Lycan Dardanos, Alpha King, and Nyx Evander, his mate, his queen, the silver wolf that the world had once called cursed. A drum begins, slow, steady, the heartbeat of something ancient. The 7 years between the Battle of Black Moon and this night had not been easy. Peace never is. There were packs who refused to recognize Nyx's position, political challenges that required careful navigation, old allies who became wary at the Silver Wolf's increasing visibility, and old enemies who became dangerously motivated. There were nights when she and Lycan sat across from each other in his war room until dawn, working through problems that had no clean solutions, speaking with the brutal honesty that was the only currency their relationship trusted. There were also other nights when the argument stopped mid-sentence and something else took over. Nights when she woke and found him already awake beside her, watching the moon through the window with an expression she had learned to read. Not his public face, not the Alpha King's mask, but the face of the man underneath it, still learning how to carry the weight of who he had been and who he was becoming. She had not forgiven him simply or cheaply. He had not asked her to. That was what made it real. Luna grew. A child's voice, older now, at 13, with an authority in it that carries. At 13, she had grown into the kind of person who walked into rooms and changed the temperature of them. Not through intimidation. She had inherited her mother's particular brand of dangerous calm rather than her father's cold authority. She learned politics the way she learned everything else, with relentless, precise, occasionally unsettling focus. She read the old texts, all of them. She tracked down scholars who specialized in Silver Wolf history and interviewed them with a thoroughness that left them faintly overwhelmed. She was 7 when she told Lycan, with complete seriousness, that his Eastern Border Treaty had a structural weakness that would cause problems in approximately 4 years. It caused problems in 3.5. And he started including her in strategic discussions after that. The pack, slow to accept many things, as packs always are, had accepted Luna with a completeness that surprised even Nyx. Some of it was politics. Some was the natural pull of a strong personality. But most of it, Nyx suspected, was simpler than that. Luna was genuine. In a world that ran on performance and hierarchy and the careful management of how one was perceived, Luna was simply, entirely, uncomplicatedly herself. And wolves, for all their complexity, were animals at their core. Animals know authenticity. They loved her for it. Now, under the winter solstice moon, the ceremony was simple. Nyx had requested that. No elaborate ritual, no lengthy speech-making, no performance of power. Simply the bond acknowledged in the old way before witnesses, and in the language of the original covenant between the moon and her children. Lycan took her hands. His grip was warm, certain. She remembered the last time she had stood in this hall, his cold indifference, the pain that had detonated through her chest, the light that had exploded from her body and knocked him backward. She remembered being so small in this room. She did not feel small now. "I see you," Lycan said. Old words, ancient formula, but in his voice right now, they were not formula. "As the moon sees, completely, without shadow." "I see you," Nyx answered. The words came from a place in her she had not known existed until she stood here. Completely, without shadow. The bond, That old, scarred, persistent thing that had survived rejection and years and war and a kind of forgiveness harder than any battle, blazed. And not painfully, not with the desperate urgency of a wound trying to close. Wholly. The crowd outside falls absolutely silent. Then, a sound like a chord struck on an instrument no human has ever built. The sound the universe makes when something clicks into place. The silver light came from her again. But this time, it did not break anything. It spread outward from where their hands joined, moving through the hall and through the walls and across the hills where the gathered wolves stood watching. And every wolf it touched lifted their face to the night sky and howled. Not in fear, not in battle, in recognition. In the forest nearby, Luna sat on the roof of the outbuilding she had claimed as her study, watching the light spread across her people, her face tilted up. She was not participating in the ceremony in any formal capacity, and she had decided on her own and without explanation that she preferred to observe. Beside her sat Mr. Wolf, whose actual name was Taryn, who was 26 and Black Moon Pack's youngest general, and who had never quite stopped being assigned to the vicinity of Luna Dardanos, whether it was officially his assignment or not. "It's beautiful," Taryn said, watching the silver light move across the territory. Yes, Luna agreed. She was watching it with her silver eyes, but also, already, with the other part of her attention. The part that never quite stopped calculating. It's also visible from the eastern border. That's a concern you're having right now, at this moment. The eastern border touches 3 neutral territories and 1 pack that sent no representative to tonight's ceremony, Luna said. I've been watching the intelligence reports. Something is moving out there. Taryn stared at her. "You're 13, he said. "I'm aware," she said. And then, after a pause, "Tell me about the Ashen Pact." He went very still. "That's classified above. I know what level it's classified at," she said patiently. "Tell me anyway." Below them, the silver light was still spreading. The howls of thousands of wolves filled the night. The moon hung enormous and ancient and full, and it was the most beautiful thing most of the wolves who stood under it would ever see in their lives. Luna Dardanos watched it all with love and silver eyes and the quiet, certain knowledge that beauty and danger were not opposites. They were usually the same thing. Silence. Then, a sound from far away. Not a wolf. Not anything familiar. Something older. Porsche. In the deep northeast, beyond the mapped territories, beyond the packs that sent representatives or acknowledged politics, beyond the borders of the known world, something stirred. It had been still for a very long time. Watching. Waiting for the moment when the silver wolf revealed herself fully. When the power that the moon goddess had been building across generations finally came into its complete form. Now it had. Now the waiting was over. In the darkness of the northeast, in a place that did not appear on any map, in a hall that had been old before Black Moon Pack existed, lights came on one by one in windows of black stone, and a voice that had not spoken in 300 years said, "Send the word. The silver line is complete." And somewhere between the stars and the forest floor, and in the space where the moon goddess lived when she was not watching over her wolves, something smiled. Not because the danger was coming, but because the answer to it was already there, already growing, already in ways that even the danger could not yet understand, already prepared. In the ceremonial hall, Nyx Evander, Silver Queen of Black Moon Pack, maid of the Alpha King, mother of the Heir, tilted her head back and looked at the moon, and smiled. Because fate had tried once to break her, and instead, it had made her the only one who could face what was coming. The end. Luna's story continues in The Heir of Silver Blood, Book 2 of the Silver Line.